Well, hello. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a marvelous lunch. Welcome back onto the observability and security track. This next session, really looking forward to, if we review the previous 15 years or so of DevOps evolution, I think one of the biggest revolutions in that period has surely been the extent to which security has become a first order concern for software developers now. So the whole DevSecOps movement brought a rich selection of frameworks and tools that's embedded security into the development lifecycle. Now, Gilbert's going to give us the specifics of how you manage this, including example KPIs. So with that, I will hand over to you, Gilbert. Please take us through that.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the intro. I'm gonna go ahead and start my presentation, and then we'll kick it off, guys. All right. So just wanted to reiterate, right? We're gonna talk a little bit about how to integrate security and quality into your CI/CD pipelines and what KPIs to measure. And it's really about let's just talk a little bit about myself, right? I've been in the industry for about 10 years. I've helped many different, I'll call it levels in the space. I've been from a vice president to a practitioner. I've managed SaaS platforms at Aptus, at Citrix, etc. So where I practice a lot of the governance and measured a lot of the KPIs for DevOps, right, and cloud operations. So I have extensive knowledge of cloud and DevOps. So I'm just gonna jump right into it. So this picture may look familiar to you guys, where we see a lot of people chasing or trying to put out a fire, right? Because there's an incident that happened. There is something that a new hack or bad actor created because there was a software vulnerability. And this is kind of how I feel the industry is always behind or trying to put out fires in a rapid moment, and things actually don't get addressed until there's a fire, right? So for example, if there was a log4j, right, which I'll get into a little bit here, but again, this is familiar, right? We have solar winds where it cost them a lot of money for them to be able to fix this solar winds issue, right? Where somebody got into their supply chain really early in the process, and were able to take over their supply chain at the build process, and then were able to insert their own code, and then affecting all of their customers. So the industry's definitely been able to you know look at these examples and hopefully address them within their organization, right? Now, just quickly around there on the supply chain for some solar wind numbers, right? I think I have a slide here a little bit later that talks about the numbers, but they're estimating a good $90 million of just the solar winds example, right? And then how do you really understand like log4j? How do you really know you've covered everything in the log4j area? So again, the familiarity around security for DevOps. So developers, they like to move really fast, right? They like to create features, they like to explore, they like to develop fast. There's about an 80-to-1 developer from a security perspective. And then they have manual security testing practices, which I'll talk a little bit more about the different areas of security within a pipeline, right? But eventually, if we're effectively there's what I call a wall of confusion or a wall of compliance between what we call in the industry DevOps and security. So now, if you can imagine like a DevOps team and a wall, and then a security team, they're not always speaking to each other, right? Developers tend to develop code, and then once they develop the code, they don't necessarily throw it over the fence, but they're just not aware of the best practices when it comes to security. So that feedback loop sometimes is not is not super fast when it comes to, hey, you have secrets in code, or you have this. So what ends up happening, it ends up affecting the company's brand and reputation when the log4j's and the SolarWinds things happen, right? It lowers productivity, increases cost of fixing bugs, and then it's a really huge risk exposure when it comes to protecting customer data. At the end of the day, why are we doing security? Because we need to protect customer data. That's probably our number one priority as a company, from a compliance, from a trust perspective, from a secure customer experience and a brand reputation, right? I keep saying that because this is huge, right? How long will it take, SolarWinds and all these other companies, to get that brand reputation, to have that trust again? It's really difficult, right? So again, there's some numbers here of the penalties of how much it costs on the breaches that we've seen in the recent years, right? So what's the cost of fixing those? Well, NIST says it's increasing exponentially with time. 1x, 5x, 10x, 15, 30x in the future. So we really have to address this today, right? So how do we do this? How do you start? You may ask. So we need to make security part of your DNA. You need to have it distributed and embedded. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna, you know, doesn't mean that you're gonna lose the convenience because you're introducing the complexity of security, right? You want to move fast and stay secure, but yeah, of course, you need to move, enable the developer to be able to do this, right? You need to promote a culture where everybody is ownership or has a champion within that team to be secure. And then you gotta make the communication and feedback loop easier and smoother. How? By speaking the developer language, right? So obviously there's a lot of tools in the market at each level here, right? You have everything from the source to the build, config, test, deploy, ITSM, collaboration, and monitoring. Now, when you look at this may seem overwhelming, right? And there's still a growing number of tools out there that you see, and sometimes it could be confusing between, like, hey, what is, let's say the config part, where you run Chef and Puppet, but you can, sometimes they use it as, infrastructure as code. So it's critical to use building blocks here and establish a framework, something like a salsa framework, something like a NIST framework, where you start looking at security as a guideline or as a baseline, so you can start implementing some of the security capabilities. So most of you may hear a strategy out there that they'll call shift left, right? And it's initiatives of shifting left that say, hey, I want to shift security farther to the left side of the development cycle. So think of it like a factory. I always like to use the car analogy, because they build, CI/CD, or software supply chain, came from the manufacturing of cars, right? If you look at how they manufacture cars, is very similar to how we build software. But so baking in security and quality into the life cycle is really what we want to do. So continuous testing and security, customizable guardrails and gates. I call them guardrails, not gates. Gates feels like they're, like you're gating something or you're blocking something. Guardrails should be something where you want to establish those guardrails. Like, have, it's kind of like when you're playing bowling, right? And you have your little ones that they need the guardrails so the ball can stay within the lane, but you still, they're staying within the lane and they still hit the pins at the end of the day. Very similar to that, right? With the fast feedback loop enabling your developers to allow them to continue to work. Automatic notifications and alerting. Again, that feedback loop, right? You need a feedback loop quick and fast. And then one-click audible report. So when your auditors come around for compliance reasons, GDPR, or, in our case in California, we have the California, rules. So we need to empower and enable our developers. All right, so a little bit of how we would break this down, right? I think most of you may have heard, like, hey, yeah, I know about this, I know about NIST, but how do I really get started? How do I really start looking at my security across my CI/CD? Well, this is something that I've done in the past where we put kind of an inventory list, right? With any company you go at, you're gonna have a lot of different tools. Maybe you're gonna have engineering spin up maybe their own tools. How do you really start looking at your source code management, your code itself, your dependencies, and your CI/CD capability? So one of the first things we like to look at from a source code management perspective is the number of repositories. Like, you'd be surprised at how many security, call it secrets, token, passwords, even artifacts you may find that people store in their source code management repositories. How many of those are private versus public? How many of them actually have, what kind of webhooks do you have? Because normally, or a lot of the time, when I do this security, I hire a red team. As soon as the red team comes in, I ask them to go break the pipeline, or go find holes in the pipeline of how we would, let's say, gain a root on a container, as an example. But I mean, go look at your source code repository and look at, securing your source code repository. Do your users have MFA enabled? Do your users connect to a corporate user versus non-corporate users? GitHub, as an example, you have to connect and relate, your external to your corporate. So, just look at those types of permissions on your code. Directly look at sensitive data in code. Again, your secrets, your your passwords, your Docker containers issue. How do you build it? Is it a repeatable build? You know, do you have information to recreate the build? Do you have a way to access those locations? Do you have checksums on artifacts, right? When you start building those process, do you have hardening of tools on the build process? For example, CIS benchmarks. When you're building a Docker container, and then finally, SaaS vulnerabilities, etc. And then dependencies, right? What kind of dependencies do you have on open source or external dependencies? And then finally, your CI/CD. Who has access to your CI/CD pipelines? Do you want a junior developer accessing a pipeline that may be, production, as an example? Do you want, how do you find out inactive members, or no minimum review of verification? So this is a good, I'll call it, good starting point. But we'll check it out. We'll check the KPIs a little bit later. So again, enable policies, or what I call governance, right? Think about governance in a way. Governance is a big word, right? So think of governance like in a soft and a hard governance, right? Soft governance is like, hey team, I really would like for you to practice this. I'm not enforcing it yet, but here it is. Like, as an example, we're gonna say, hey, we're gonna scan for secrets in code. We're gonna let you know that this is there, but we're not gonna enforce it yet, right? So that's kind of governing soft. Governing hard is when you say, hey guys, we found secrets in code. We're gonna block those, and we're not gonna allow you to go further until you fix it, you remediate, and you keep going faster. But I mean, that those are policies that you got to create. Now, again, my suggestion here is follow the follow the new salsa framework that's provided by Google, and create policies from those salsa frameworks. If we have time, I'll share kind of a document of how we're creating our policies for each of the sections of the pipeline. So again, use pre-approved gates or pre-approved pipelines so that you're able to move through the thresholds, and have that continuous loop. Again, the shift left pipelines, right? Where do you start? There's so many tools, and there's so many, I'll call it, open source tools, right? But out of the box integrations that you're going to look at, right, from a build, the unit testing, the SAST, and then you have the continuous security right in the middle. How, what kind of tools are out there to be able to do this, right? I'll talk a little bit about like Anchor. There's a huge popularity with Docker containers, right? Where Anchor provides you the visibility of scanning that Docker container at the time of build, right? It gives you vulnerability list of all that to make sure your containers are secure. But definitely at each of these steps in the pipeline, you want to be able to, introduce a gate. Again, think of the governing soft and governing hard. Hey team, you should do this. Hey team, we're gonna enforce this now in the future. Cool. So again, you know, new from a cloud perspective and security practices, right? We have to look at each level of these security practices. So from the code, the open source, the containers, and the infrastructure as code, right? So a couple of things that you guys should look out for is how do you do ID scanning, lint scanning when it comes from a developer perspective. At Citrix, a lot of companies now, when I was there, they were starting to give developers virtual desktops that would allow them to only access that virtual desktops and only keep that code within that virtual desktop, right? In some cases, a lot of companies allow them to check out, the code from their own desktop, right? Obviously, the desktop provided by the company, but it definitely, can be bad if somebody steals up or somebody gains access to it. That could definitely be something bad. Your source code is a huge place to start with, right? Again, your scanning of code, scanning of secrets, of tokens, all of that. So how do you get an inventory of all those, right? Who has access to Git? Who has access to the repositories? Who has access to the main or master branch, right? Your branching strategy needs to be very very much looked at, if you will, right? You don't want to create multiple master branches or multiple branches, because then you'll start now maintaining two sets of code, and it's not a security issue, but it becomes a bigger company issue. Static code analysis, again, SonarQube. I'll show you guys a little bit of SonarQube a little in a screenshot later from a metrics perspective. Dynamic code analysis, how do you scan? How do you continue your scans? Sneak has a pretty good open source tool out there for that. You have others like Checkmarks and others that can help you with dynamic code analysis. Again, security, container security scanning, and then finally Vault, right? Where do you store your secrets, your passwords, your certificates, right? Have a practice of storing those in a vault. Now, building Vault on its own is pretty hard and pretty difficult. But as a security team, my suggestion would be do something like that, where you can store all of those things and then create parameter based approaches in your pipelines. Okay, cool. So bring teams together with security, quality, and KPIs, right? So from an observability perspective, security and DevOps and developers need to talk together, right? Instead of creating siloed approaches from a DevOps, security, and engineering perspective, we need to have a central observability or central way of looking at these KPIs, right? We want to be able to contextualize logs, so when we're troubleshooting things, we're able to reduce our MTTA, MTTI, MTTR, etc., right? We need to be able to have one click audit reports. So when compliance comes around, when the security team on the compliance comes around, they're like, hey, what did we do? Who has access to these pipelines? Who deploy these pipelines, etc., right? Because there is a huge gap from an audit capability. So we want to be able to see those reports, right? So again, security trends across vulnerabilities, code smells, remediation, threat vulnerabilities, right? We're looking at how do you manage or how do you scan your containers when you're building them? How do you scan your infrastructure as code as you build it? Make sure you don't leave like port 22 open to the public. And from a quality scorecard, how well are you doing? Like what are your integration tests look like? All right. So this is kind of a quick dashboard of Sonar code smells from a security scorecard perspective and a security ratings. as well as the summary and then manual test results. Now, think about it. When I showed you guys the tools for every step of the CI NCD process, there's many tools with their own dashboards, but how do you get them all into one dashboard so you're able to see, multiple steps of the pipelines, I'll call it. But I mean, this is an example of a code smell from a security scorecard, right? You'll see like, hey, if you look at the red looks like, hey, those code smells are going up from a log accumulator on line, on the run 59 right here, and it looks like it's a Java language, right? Now, this is just one part of it, but again, shifting completely left, you want to look at your GitHub or your source code management repositories to make sure you don't have like the secrets. I keep repeating that because it's so critical that you don't have those things within your code. And then you move on to the next step, which is your code smells, and then you keep going through the whole process. But again, establish those policies, establish the governing soft and the governing hard, right? So that this is kind of what some of those metrics look like. All right. So quick recap, right? Again, so create developer security champions, right? When you're speaking with developers, right? There's always their developers are super helpful. They do want to comply with security, and they understand the risk of the security, but they also want to make sure that they understand what needs to be done, and that you kind of talk their language, right? So as they're coding, they want to be able to code. They want to get the feedback loop through the code, maybe a pull request, or they want to be able to understand what's blocking them immediately. They want to be able to see where in the pipeline the build stopped without going to the actual security tools or without going to the tools, right? They kind of want everything in one place, I'll call it, right? So how do we bring that security and quality mindset across the organization? Again, education. You champion a security person, and you give them the ease, the easiness of being able to get that feedback loop, out of the box with the integrations, right? You may want to templatize pipelines that include security, quality, and governance. Now that's pretty hard, right? But being able to templatize where a developer can spin up a pipeline with those already in place, and then finally, get the observability in a single dashboard or single pane of glass that you're able to, give the developer what they need right in front of them. Cool. Questions?
Wow, so great overview, Gilbert. Thank you.
Thank you.
We don't seem to have had any queries through on the public channels yet, but just while people might be thinking of some of that. Again, fabulous overview. You mentioned the SLSA framework. So I kind of understood that you were already underway with developing policies based off the back of that. I mean, is that, again, how big of a piece of work is that to get your heads around? It sounds like an ideal place to start.
Yeah, it's a great place to start. Let me share a document that we're building internally, and it's all based on that salsa framework.
Yeah.
But it definitely, so if you think about the whole supply chain and compliance, right? You have the different levels. You have level 1 through 4. Again, you guys choose your own framework, but we chose the salsa framework because it really adheres to just the CI/CD, a whole supply chain. One of the things that we did is we created a policy, and in the policy we really said, hey, these are the requirements for version control. When you think of that, again, governing soft and governing hard, governance is a pretty big word that pretty much goes across multiple areas. It can go across DevOps, it can go across security, it can go across, you name it. It's a huge word. But if you focus governance on CI and CD or security, and you make it, you don't want to start with hard guardrails, right? You want to
Sure.
start with like soft guardrails. Hey team, these are best practices. Hey team,
Mhm.
we're going to enforce, we're going to slowly start, giving you visibility of these things.
Mhm.
Hey team, well, now that we've given you visibility, we're going to give you 3 months. Hey team, after the 3 months, we're going to start, enforcing this, right?
Yeah.
Some of them might move faster than others, but if you look at your source code management here and you start looking at your policies, you want to see, like, for example, verified history.
Sure.
In the past, when we've done scans of even the commits of, let's say, code history, you can
Mhm.
find secrets, you can
Yeah.
find tokens, and that's a huge one. That's how a lot of, I'll call it, a lot of companies out there have gotten, you know have gotten hacked, or have gotten their
Sure.
AWS shut down because
Mhm.
they found that in secrets, right? Um,
Yes. Yeah.
but I mean, start thinking about, like, don't push directly to master.
Mhm.
That's bad practice, right? Don't commit to unauthorized code, right?
Sure.
There's just little things that you can think of, and then start doing the same thing for the build integrity part of it,
Mhm.
you know, and then just keep going.
Right. And in terms of, teams adopting this approach, um, I'm kind of interested in what you've seen, um, so as the kind of responsibility for security comes closer to the team, um, how do they blend the expertise with what is often a separate security team? So, for instance, have you seen members of security learn about app dev? Have you seen members of app dev learn about security? Are they the best kind of champions, if you like, to own this? What kind of things have you seen in terms of how people bring those practices together? Um, that
Yeah. So what
makes
I've
sense.
seen is, I think, as part of, you usually have security as silos, and you have
Mm,
SREs or DevOps as silos. What I've seen is sometimes the DevOps teams or engineering teams are not aware, because, not that they don't want to be, but they're just, they're busy doing
sure.
their day job, and,
Hmm.
and sometimes they are aware, and maybe there's one person pushing that from a security champion point of view, but it's just them trying to push it on their own. Now, if you have security from the top down trying to push it to all teams because it's a product management priority from a
Hmm.
software or AppSec capability, then that's when it becomes super important. And that's
Hmm.
when, I don't think we should have to wait for a top down approach. Well,
Yeah.
we should try to, look at those from just even gaining
Hmm.
visibility into security, right? And then just
Sure.
talking to the security guys, and then getting educated about how do we, like, work together to be able to, visualize, because security teams most likely will give them the visibility, but
Hmm.
it's usually up to the developer and DevOps teams to actually take action,
Yeah.
right?
Sure. Sure. And how about, have you seen the other extreme, which is, is there a risk that people can kind of almost respond too enthusiastically to the automation message and suggest it's all done for you. You don't have to worry about it now. Does that almost begin to cloak, if you like, activity? So-called checkbox mentality. How do we de-risk the extreme automation approach where it's now hands off. It's all assumed to just happen automatically under the hood.
Yeah, so when it's assumed that it's done automatically, or if you have a system or something that allows you to have, that feedback loop, then
Hmm.
it's really what you start implementing guardrails in your pipelines, right? As soon as you
Right.
commit code, boom, it starts checking that code, right? It starts checking that source code management, and before you even move it to the next step,
Mm.
you're able to catch those. But the feedback loop and how you give it back to the developer,
Sure.
try to make it as frictionless as possible, not
Hmm.
transact. So don't create a ticket, then have the developer say, "Hey, you got to deploy a ticket," because that's when I almost feel like you turn off the developer, you turn
Yeah.
off the DevOps engineer, because they're like, "Oh, great, I have to create a ticket.
Mm.
It's going to take 2 days. I don't. That's not the feedback loop I'm looking at. I
Yeah.
want an like immediate, almost on demand feedback loop.
No, good point. And we've got a great question in from Zhao online here. So, how does this shift left approach correlate with certifications like ISO 27001?
Yeah,
Um, uh, yeah. So there's a great clash of cultures there, isn't there? So,
yeah.
yeah, what have you seen there?
So from for Jao, from a perspective of ISO 27001, I think from just, I'll call it compliance overall, there's a gap when, someone like himself comes over and says, hey, I need to provide evidence, or I need to provide auditing of these things that we say we do, right? But there's no way to catch it, right? So shifting left will help with your auditing, will help with providing proof of, yes, we do these things. Yes, we have these auditing things, right? Um, I work for Opsera, and I don't really want to talk about Opsera, but we help companies pretty much with their CI/CD pipeline in
Mhm.
every step of the way to achieve the compliance and achieve the security. So we're able to help deliver some of those reports through KPIs with you guys. And we follow the DORA metrics, but even DORA metrics, to me, they're super popular. But let's get back
Sure.
to even the basics, right? Let's get back to, like, can we deploy software repeatedly to the same
Yeah.
source in the
Yeah.
same way, or even sequentially?
Yeah.
Can we actually scan our source code repositories? How do we make them, secure? But yeah, I mean, coming back to the question, yeah, it helps with your ISO 27001. It helps you with
Mm.
your GDPR. It helps you with, like, if you establish like a NIST or SALSA framework, it'll
Mhm.
help you with achieving those certifications, right?
No, great. And a great point you make there about you know making sure you've got the basics covered. And as you say, the DORA metrics are so popular. It would be interesting to consider almost, if you put a security hat on, what would be the bare minimum of metrics you'd put alongside DORA to say we've got hygiene and agility, and we also have sufficient security. I'm not going to put you on the spot for an answer to that question now, Gilbert, but that'd be something. But it's something great to think about, wouldn't it? I've never thought of that before. I've never thought of putting those two together. It now strikes me that would be quite a powerful set of themes, if you like.
I mean,
You
start.
almost using the Dora momentum as a way to accelerate the security conversation. Sorry, carry on. Yeah,
No. I think what my suggestion is, just start with inventory, right? A
yeah,
lot of us, when you're in security, you're like, hey, what do I do? Like, how do I know what's out there? How do I
yeah,
know what to protect if I don't know what's out there, right? And you'll see like a bunch of different engineering teams, build their own things, and they build it with their own tools, right? Some
mm,
of them may have, Jenkins, or some of them may have, I've been at companies where you have three different open source tools. I mean, not three different source code management tools, like
yeah,
GitHub, GitLab, and Perforce as an example, right?
yes,
It's like,
yeah,
whoa, okay, how do you, like, my suggestion is just do an inventory. Look
yeah,
at what can you connect systems into an inventory, and that's kind of what Opsera is also helping with, right? We're helping
sure,
with bringing visibility, adjust your inventory, because if you
sure.
don't know what you don't have, how do you start protecting it,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah,
So just
um,
start with the
yeah,
basics, like, in my opinion, foundations of asset control and inventory, software asset controls, and then look at your vulnerabilities and your vulnerability
yeah,
management, right?
yeah.
And then from there, you'll start growing to your other areas, right?
Brilliant. Excellent. And in terms of, people wanting to understand these themes more, in terms of, okay, from a development perspective, I'm going to now spend a lot more time, investing in this approach, and maybe that's something I want to specialize in. Were there any key resources or forums you'd point people to in terms of, the whole world of security automation, the developer life cycle?
Yeah, I mean, there is a huge, again, the salsa framework is one of them, the
Yes.
CNCF, CNCF has some great, tools
Yeah.
and conversations around DevOps. Look at your building securely with, let's say, with the different tool sets like Packer, Vault, etc. Look at storing secrets outside of source code. I think again, I keep repeating myself there, but those have been a lot of the pain of companies that have gotten hacked and have gotten bad actors to get in because of that. But I mean, those are some of the resources that you can get in, right? And then from a security, you know, I forget the name right now. I'm blanking out on the name. But yeah, there just hire a red team,
Yeah,
hire
sure.
a really good guy, and go do the exercises of ransomware, right? One of the things that we did as a red teamer, I had a red teamer go do a ransomware. I had a red teamer go do Bitcoin mining, and I just wanted to see if the security team would catch it. Right? That's
Oh,
it.
that's cruel. That's cruel. And did they?
They caught the Bitcoin mining. They didn't catch the
Wow.
ransomware.
Wow, really? Yeah, yeah.
So,
I mean,
so
yeah, yeah. I think you make such a great point. From a security perspective, do we even know what is out there? I certainly know from my experience. If you've got 10 different teams from 10 different locales, all working for the same corporate, and if you ask how are we managing our secrets, you can see the color drain from people's faces. It's kind of like, oh, we're not going there. Yeah. So I think those fundamentals often get missed. Yeah, fabulous point.
yeah, I think again, just you don't want to be the next SolarWinds. You don't want to have the next, Equifax or breach, right? And I think doing those practices by a red teamer really really helps. Like my last company, we did a red team exercise and we were able to hack the build process of a container. We were able to get root,
Wow. Yeah,
because somebody had a bad webhook on the back end of GitHub.
sure.
Right?
Yeah,
Webhooks are extremely cool. They're easy to use, but they're extremely open.
of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So take a look at those webhooks, right? And that's why, as part of the inventory, webhooks is part of that, right?
No, brilliant points. Thank you. So I think we've had the end of the QAs there. Again, I think there's some great responses and some fabulous examples through all of that, Gilbert. Thank you. So it looks like we might gain a little bit of time back before the next session. We've been talking about red teams. We've got the purple teaming approach next at 1:30. So I hope to see you all then. But in the meantime, thank you, Gilbert. Thank you very much. That was an excellent session.
Thank you guys. All right. Bye now.